A week to go and Pops would be off again, this time to America, Canada and Mexico. He was already getting nervous. If only I could drive or go by boat or even row across, was what he thought every time he had to fly. He hated it. He hated everything about it. Saying goodbye to Pen and the kids, queuing, he still hates queuing, wandering up and down the duty-free shops just waiting for the command to board. He reckons terminals are one of the loneliest places on the earth. Then there's the actual flying, with sweaty hands, stomach churning upside down every time there is the slightest bit of turbulence. And then, when it's smooth, wondering if the engines are still working. And of course, all the stuff the hostess puts in front of you to eat, juggling plastic knives and forks, hoping your drink doesn't tip up over the chef's so-called special dessert. Or is it the meat course, and Pops has got them the wrong way round? Then Pops, because he was wishing he'd said no to the invitations, would be feeling guilty. He'd be asking himself if God had really called him to preach the gospel, and wishing that he was looking out of the window and seeing those beautiful patchwork fields that say welcome home to Heathrow. Now fasten your seatbelts. At last we were about to land. Then, bump, bump, we've made it. Hallelujah. All is forgotten until the next time. For 2 weeks, Pops sees God doing wonderful things in people's lives and asks for forgiveness for ever doubting Jesus and his mighty gospel. But then all of a sudden, he's alone again in Chicago Airport, waiting for his flight to Calgary. And here come the sweaty hands and all the fear comes flooding back. Pops thinks of Penny, who loves flying. What's not to like, she says. Nice comfy seat, time to relax, a nice read, someone serving me drinks and meals that I haven't had to cook, even time to write my Christmas cards and maybe do a bit of knitting. This was in the olden times when sharp knitting needles were allowed and there was a bit more leg room. Right, that's it, this is ridiculous, Pops said to himself this time, and then to the Lord. Lord, I have 3 hours before my flight. I'm preaching about the love and power of God and I'm scared stiff of flying. I'm a hypocrite. I am locking myself into this toilet and I'm not coming out until you set me free from this uncontrollable fear. Please, Lord. And in that toilet, God did set Pops free, and with a skip and a jump, off he went to board his flight. On that flight, Pops found himself in the middle of a Roman Catholic convention, with maybe 4 or 5 dozen priests and nuns off to a conference in Calgary. Pops had a priest on one side and a nun on the other, and they started talking about religion. Pops said he didn't know much about religion, but he did know Jesus. In that case, you must come back to the Mother Church, they said. Pops thanked them for their kind invitation and asked them who the head of the church was. The Pope, of course, they replied. Oh, the head of my church is Jesus, so maybe you would like to come back to mine. Pops replied with a bit of a cheeky smile. Pops was a very young man back then, and hopefully over the years he's become a little more gracious. Hopefully. The seatbelt sign came on and the flight was on its final descent into Calgary Airport. The pilot apologised in advance for the bumpy descent, explaining that because the airport was so close to the Rocky Mountains, the flights had to descend slightly faster than usual and there would be some turbulence. There was a lot of turbulence and everyone suddenly became very quiet. All around, Pop's prayer beads came out and heads began to bow, but Pops was as happy as anything and started sharing with his new friends what God had done for him in the airport, with no interruptions. In 2 weeks' time he was off again, this time flying from Spokane to Guadalajara, courtesy of Mexican Airways. The pilot thought it would be nice to give the passengers a free trip round Mount St Helens, which had just erupted. 1 or 2 passengers seemed to enjoy the view, but most were looking for their sick bags. That was good. Would you like to go round again? The pilot asked, and so, having put 10 pesos in the slot, around they all went again. British Airways was never as good fun as this, thought Pops, but then sadly the pilot headed south and all became calm, until, that is, somewhere over Mexico, the plane hit a huge electrical storm. Looking out of the window, Pops was reminded of the films he had seen of the desert battle of El Alamein during the Second World War. Everywhere there were huge explosions of light and thunder. While Pops worshipped the God of all creation, outside there was war, but inside his heart there was a perfect peace. Now people were being sick, baggage was falling out from the lockers, people were being lifted off their seats, even with their seatbelts on. Over the screams, the pilot informed everyone that he was going to make an emergency landing. On the third attempt, the plane touched the landing strip and finally came to a stop. The passengers were then informed that the pilot would take off again as soon as possible because the airport where they had landed was not an international one and therefore no one could disembark. Immediately there was a stampede for the exits and people banging on the doors, pleading to get out. Pops suggested to a hostess that it might help if the pilot said they would only take off again when the storm had passed. But the flight deck remained silent until 2 hours later when the weather had calmed down. The seatbelt signs flashed and the pilot told everyone it was now safe to continue their journey. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and God had proved to Pops that his peace that passes all understanding certainly guards and keeps a man's heart, even a heart of a scaredy-pants like Pops.